Well, welcome to the Awesome Earthkind podcast. If you would, please introduce yourself, who you are, and where do you live, and what kind of work you do.
Ron, so glad to be here. My name's Zach Stein. I am one of the founders of Carbon Collective, and I live in the lovely Bay Area, California, in the East Bay near Berkeley.
Nice. Hey, Zach, we like to start off with, we call it a quantum quote, an inspirational quote that helps people understand kind of where you're coming from and frames the conversation a bit. Could you be kind enough to share one of yours, please?
Yeah, so I heard this quote recently. It's from one of my favorite basketball players. His name's Andre Iguodala. He plays for the Warriors. And he had this relatively cryptic tweet after a rough loss a few weeks back. And he said, "You can't climb a mountain if it's smooth."
Ooh.
And as an entrepreneur who's trying to, work in, I think, a pretty challenging space, and I think just in general in life, I love that image of, oh, I want to get to this peak. But if it doesn't have like the valleys and the crags and the handholds, the chips in it, you actually can't climb it.
Yeah, just
Um,
slide right down, right? So, yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So I really like that quote.
Yeah, it's excellent. Outstanding. Thanks so much. All right. So why do you do this kind of work, Zach? Why are you in it? What's the motivation?
Yeah. So we started Carbon Collective with what ended up being a goal of fundamentally redefining sustainable investing. For us, I'm sure as you and your listeners appreciate, within sustainability, climate change is the number one issue. If we do not solve it, all the other efforts that we're doing are basically moot. And we know what we have to do. It is a solvable problem, and we have roughly 30 years to get it, to basically get us to a zero carbon society. Um, if we don't do that, it's going to be pretty scary. And to imagine, like, it's not going to matter how many trees we plant and how much carbon we sequester out of the atmosphere if we are unable to turn off the tap of emissions. So science is really clear about what has to happen to do that is we need to dramatically change how we invest. We need to be investing 10 to 20 times more year or per year into climate solutions, while we need to be winding down investments into the fossil fuel industry basically to zero by the time that we hit 2050.
And so you said, kind of what you guys do and where you're headed, but all right. So the why for you is
The why is we need sustainable investing to be as good as possible to solve climate change.
so basically it's because climate change is going to destroy all civilization. Is that the bottom line, Zach?
It's that, and the world where we solve climate change is also just way better than the world today. It is safer, it is cleaner. We don't have thugs like Putin doing what thugs like Putin are doing right now. So there's a huge reward at the end of this rainbow that is not just we avoid the catastrophe of catastrophic warming.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you also have at least one child, eh?
I do. I do. I have an almost 5 month old. His name is
Yeah.
Caleb. He is incredibly cute. And yeah, I'm here in the Bay Area watching my region dry out, watching the fact that there are fire season is a thing now. I grew up here. It was never a thing up until suddenly, I think it was 2017 hit. And all of the sudden, it was for 2 to 3 months of every year we could expect to have smoke in the skies. It was
Yeah.
such a sudden change.
Yeah.
Um, Climate change is here, and it is going to get worse before it gets better.
Yep. All right. So tell us what you do. What do you guys at
So,
Carbon Collective do?
yeah, at Carbon Collective, we build comprehensive portfolios that look forward to say, what is the world that we need to build to solve climate change? We look at what are the best plans for that. And then we connect the dots back to what is the world that we have today? Because your things like your retirement fund, they are not charity. So it has to be a smart way to invest. But beyond that, how do we build and generate the greatest change that we can and impact that we can with that? The problem was what we see is that what Wall Street often offers as sustainable investing or ESG is just a less bad version of the world today with no clear theory of change
Hmm.
in it. So you as an individual investor is saying like, yeah, I want to align this with my values in the world that I want to retire into. It's really hard to find options, especially options that you trust. So that is what we do as a company. We offer for individuals. We help people with their brokerage accounts, IRAs, and trusts. You'll pay the same as you would for generic online investing portfolios. So you're not going to pay more to invest in alignment with your values here. And we also help businesses by managing their 401ks to give options for sustainable investing and ethical investing where they haven't existed before.
So give us an example of like, if an individual comes along, they're looking to do something, what sort of things do you do with them? And then how do you screen what you're doing for them?
So let me describe how we build our portfolios. I think that I'll get to the individual part of your
Okay.
question.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
So we look at the whole stock market broadly. This is, what Vanguard taught us, and it's correct, is that the best investing strategy is to invest with as much as the market as you can, with as low fees as possible, and just set it and forget, especially for individuals. It's like, all right, how do we apply that with the lens of climate? So we do it with 3 steps. The first is we divest, and we look and say, what are the industries who are technologically dependent upon fossil fuels for their long-term core business? Put another way, if we jump ahead to a zero carbon world where we are on the path to solving climate change, which industries could not exist barring a miracle technology breakthrough? So, the company within it would have to switch industries to becoming a solar company or something like
So
this.
what kind of companies are those?
So we divest from oil companies, coal, petrochemicals, airlines, airline manufacturers, cement, steel, and more. Dirty utilities. It's about 20% of the overall stock market.
Wow. So I could see most of those. So the breakthrough technologies in cement, I did a podcast with a guy who actually has a carbon capture that actually goes into cement, which was really fascinating because we actually use so much cement we could capture and sequester all the carbon we can produce in just the cement that we are already using. So is something like that possible as a kind of a new investment kind of opportunity? Is that?
Yes, so there's an interesting split between, the companies like you're talking about is a climate solutions company,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's also kind of the end user of a climate solution with
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
We reevaluate this as we go of like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it does look like for some things like steel, like there are some steel plants in the Nordic region, for example,
Mm-hmm.
where they are able to make carbon-free steel by
Wow.
using the significant amount of hydropower in a different process that they have.
Hmm.
That's really exciting. So when the opportunities come to hold, that company, we want to make sure that we're doing it. But broadly, we remove these categories. We divest from them and we reinvest into the companies that are building solutions
Cool.
to climate change.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where that company would come into play. If that was a publicly traded company,
Mm-hmm.
we would bring it into strong consideration. What we do is we say, all right, let's look at what are the best plans that we have for solving climate change. And these are all independent plans. So like groups like Project Drawdown, the International Energy Agency, Rewiring America, we say, all right, these are what the smartest people are saying has to happen for us to solve climate change. What are all the climate solutions within those plans? And then what companies, publicly traded companies, are building those solutions? So that's the inclusionary filter. We then exclude the companies that generate more revenue from products or services that are dependent upon or built for the fossil fuel industry. We don't use pledges or anything like that because talk is really cheap in this space. We say that your last year's revenue is the best predictor of how you're going to be investing
Mm.
in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Let me give an example of a company we exclude to bring that. So
Yeah.
General Electric, and this happened in the last year, they are the second largest manufacturer of wind turbines
Mm-hmm.
in the world.
Right.
Obvious climate solution. They generate more revenue, unfortunately, from their natural gas turbine business and their jet
Mm.
engine business.
Mm.
Therefore, directionally, that we see them not as aligned with solving climate change, and so we do not include them in our climate solutions collection. We aren't picking winners and losers in that. We're not saying this solar company is going to win over that one. We let the market decide that, and we weight them based upon market cap,
Hmm.
with a ceiling at 5% and a floor at 0.01% for that
Okay.
collection. So that's the 20% we reinvest in. That's step two. Step three is we broadly hold The rest of the stock market, with a few exceptions, we exclude big banks because of their significant exposure to fossil fuel lending. Um, but mostly we broadly hold the rest of the market because these are the companies, it's the inverse of the first, whose core businesses can exist in a world where we've solved climate change in a zero carbon world. It does not mean they're environmentally friendly today. But what it does mean is that this is where we should use our shares and our pressure as voters to say, hey, let's get you there as quickly as possible. I like to give the example of Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, for you and greenies like you and me, were not like, oh, they're a paragon of sustainability. Very much the opposite today.
Hmm.
But in a zero carbon world, there's no reason that Coke can't sell me a beverage using the secret recipe.
Hmm.
So that means it's upon us as shareholders to get them to adopt 100% renewable energy, 100% electrified fleet, and be protecting instead of abusing their natural resources, and get them to do that as quickly as possible.
Hmm.
So that's where we want to apply that. So with that, we build portfolios that are low fee, they're comprehensive. You're going to get a similar level of risk and reward as you would to a generic index-based portfolio, but there's a clear theory of change of why everything is in it.
Outstanding. So what's would you say there's been? I mean, do you do new companies, existing, more established companies? What size companies do you invest in?
Yeah, so it's only publicly traded companies.
Hmm.
So we don't do private investments. So early stage VC or something like that. And we're broad. Again, we let the market decide.
Hmm.
We do not. A company must have IPO'd at least 6 months before to make it
Okay.
into our climate solutions
Hmm.
category. We like
Hmm.
to wait for the employees to be able to cash out. That's when volatility starts to settle down a
Mm.
little bit.
Hmm.
But we update this. We use and update that the filters. We don't update the filters. We run through them again annually. So we bring in the new companies, and that's how we update that methodology.
Oh, excellent. So, what kind of returns do people expect? Is it compatible and competitive with the rest of the market? And
Yeah, so you can go on our website to look at our historic returns. We try to make it really clear. The one thing we also try to say is when you deviate from investing with the market, you are going to have different returns than the market.
hmm.
It's just a fundamental fact. You'll have times where you've seen outperformance, and then you'll also have times with underperformance. We make no pledges or guarantees about like, hey, we're trying to beat the market next year or anything like that. Our goal is to create a really clear and comprehensive strategy that is safe and makes sense for long-term investing. We do believe that over that long term, that this type of strategy is likely to outperform because when we look at the macro trends of what's happening, um, it generally makes sense to not hold companies or industries that are in decline and to hold industries that are poised for dramatic growth for long-term investing. When we look at oil, its market share is just being eaten up. I'll give you an example. 50% of the oil that over 50% of the oil that we consume in the US is on our roadways. It's by cars and trucks. We have a better technology that does not use oil. Electric cars, they are faster, stronger. They cost way less to maintain. You can drive a Tesla for over 1 million miles. They are safer. And within the next 5 years, they are likely going to cost less upfront. So you just have a fundamentally better technology, regardless of if you're a greenie like me
Hmm.
with it.
Hmm.
Um, that is going to take up a lot of oil's market share. A lot of
Hmm.
gasoline is not going to be used in that. And oil doesn't, there's not other places for them to go. The plastic market is pretty saturated. We're seeing a lot of pushback there. In electricity, maybe natural gas is the only place where there's some room for expansion. But
Mm.
again, we're seeing lots of a very strong pushback against natural gas right now.
Hmm.
They're trying to maybe move into the blue hydrogen space
Hmm.
where they're using natural gas to turn that into hydrogen. But
Hmm.
the fundamental economics of green hydrogen seem like they will be much better. This is where you're just splitting water atoms using excess renewable energy
Hmm.
because the power is free to
Right.
do that. So as an industry, just purely looking at it, it's unclear where we're going to see expansion from it. And fundamentally, oil only gets more expensive to extract because we do the cheapest sites first.
Right.
Oil accounts for something I saw, it was something crazy. It was like 1/3 of inflation is
Wow.
from energy.
Yeah.
And the fact that we just keep picking the lowest hanging fruit, whereas things like renewable energy, solar, wind, and batteries are already the cheapest form of electricity in many places around the world. And what's exciting there is that it's fundamentally a manufacturing problem. And when we make things a manufacturing problem, like, yes, there are still things to figure out on the raw material side,
Hmm.
like in lithium and things like that. Um, but we're really good at humans at driving down the cost of bulk manufacturing things.
Yeah.
Um, that is one of our specialties. So that makes it even more exciting
Uh-huh.
of what that can do. And again, it's going to take up even more market share from oil and gas.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the clean energy space for 30 decades, so totally seen that trends, understand it. And, the great thing about clean energy is the more you build, the cheaper it gets. And, you build the infrastructure, you maintain the infrastructure, the water flows, the wind blows, the sun shines, you get free electricity. It's a wonderful thing. And then heat beneath our feet, or the geothermal systems that can heat and cool our homes, or it's also another fantastic option. So, do you invest in companies that do all those things? Is that how you structure your portfolios too, or?
Correct. So that's in those that reinvested piece into those climate solutions.
Hmm.
And so it's not just renewable energy, although that has a sizable share, because again, we're just using the market weightings of these
Hmm.
different companies.
Okay.
So it's, yeah, solar, wind, geothermal, battery companies, LEDs, building automation, insulation, plant-based foods. If you go to our website, you can actually see, and this is pretty cool. Um, we show the entire list. It's 169 stocks in 2022. And it started as 350 stocks, so 350 companies that were building somewhat of a climate solution. So you can actually click a filter to not just see every company that's in it and why, but also every company that got excluded, like GE, and exactly why. And it's
Awesome.
our goal is to deliver a level of transparency that hasn't been done here. Because let's be honest, in the sustainable investing space, with the level of greenwashing that has occurred, we are guilty until proven innocent
Mm.
in this. So we have to go over the top of saying, here's how we do this. Let's show you as transparently as we can. It's our goal that we are so transparent with our processes that if you wanted to do it yourself, you would get to the same result
Excellent.
as
That
we did.
the website where people can find that information is
Carboncollective.co.co.
.co. Why .co?
.com was taken. We're ahead of them in Google now, so I'm fine with it.
So .co, folks. So carboncollective.co. What does the CO stand for? Is it company? Is that what it is? Or
Yeah.
yeah, company, right? Okay, great. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or corporation. I'm not exactly sure. It's
Yeah, it's
just
like just wondering.
second
Yeah.
most popular.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All right. So how big are you guys? I mean, how much of capital do you guys control or invest or whatever? About?
Yeah. So we've been growing really quickly. We've been growing over 20% month over month since we've started.
Wow.
So yeah. So right now we're managing tens of millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And we are seeing, I think we're poised for some pretty dramatic growth,
Mm-hmm.
specifically on our 401k side of that. We're seeing
Okay.
really strong pickup, and that especially for mission aligned companies,
Mm-hmm.
um, it can be somewhat of a no brainer
Mm.
to make sure that the way that they're investing isn't contrary to their mission. And we help ensure that.
Cool. So what's the most exciting sort of things that you're seeing out there?
I think for us is being just a part of the climate tech community and the VC community right now. It's just such an exciting space to be
Mm.
in. It's so filled with hope and realism, but also optimism and building and creativity, and also lots of capital, which is really helpful
Mm-hmm.
um, in this. So yeah, just the level of talent and level of person in this space. It's often it gets compared to the early internet
Mm.
when like people weren't at each other's throats, but it was just like everyone's collaborating and we're all friends,
Uh-huh.
like trying to work on this. And
Uh-huh.
so having been in it for a couple of years, it really still feels that way,
Ah.
which is pretty amazing to be a
Right.
part of that community.
Yeah, yeah, definitely for sure. So ESG is environment, social, and governance. Do you guys touch on the other two aspects besides the environment?
We very lightly do,
Mhm.
in that we exclude companies that are just like purely evil, like private prisons. It's just contemporary slavery. Like we want no part of those dividends.
Wow.
Um, but outside of that, we ESG it has a lot of problems. ESG was initially created by institutional investors
Mhm.
to give a quantitative way to allow them to bring in ethical risks into their investment
Mhm.
strategy. Um, so it was kind of it's almost just like a credit rating or something like that. It's just a tool to analyze that.
Mhm.
What happened was is that there was very significant demand for values-based investing and impact investing. And they're
Mhm.
like, oh my God, we could quantify this? That's amazing. Let's do it. Rah, rah, rah. And ESG took off. But it's again, the product itself was never intended for values-based or impact investing.
Hmm.
And so it's been kind of twisted around and used that. And we believe that we're actually now seeing the rise of a number of companies that are in different ways trying to actually unpack and say, oh, there's a really clear demand for this,
Mhm.
but the product itself is not actually delivering. So let's build something that is.
Mhm.
We've seen other examples in the tech space of this type of unbundling happen. One of the earliest examples was Excel, where people are like, oh my God, spreadsheets are amazing. Look at all the things that I can do with it. And some people are like, huh, I bet I could organize my sales contacts on this in a much easier way and actually track people's statuses with
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
Not what the tool is originally built for. A lot of people start doing this, and a Salesforce comes around and says, "Oh, we could actually do that much better than it." So you see the people adapting to it, and that means that there's demand, which there should be much better products for it. So part of why we don't associate ourselves with ESG and think it's really hard is that um, it's hard to find where there's trust in it, because the providers of ESG data, they make their money by building proprietary data sets and processes,
Mm.
like MSCI or Sustainalytics. You as the individual investor, you don't get to see that, or you could pay like $30,000 a year to get a seat and see kind of how that sausage is being made.
Hmm.
You just get to see the output
Right.
of it.
Yeah.
And so
Interesting.
that doesn't build trust with
Uh-huh.
it, because you're like, why is this company in here? And what's the theory here? And how does this actually have impact?
Mm.
ESG does not, at least its current state, do a good job of answering that. And so we think a lot of other companies like Carbon Collective are rising in these different ways to answer it. And for us, we believe that by focusing on climate, which is something that investing in particular, we cannot solve climate change without investment.
Mhm.
Just full stop. We can't.
Right. Right.
And so, of the range of ESG issues, it is one of the most aligned with investing. There are other issues where, take gun violence for example. It's unclear how like investing more money outside of maybe advocacy or policy or lobbying changes that.
Mhm.
Um, but like we need to put solar panels in the ground,
Mhm.
and that takes money. And so there's almost just a better mental fit too of like, we need to invest to solve this. Let's change how we're investing for it. So
Mhm.
that's part of why our focus on climate is so like why we have that, and we think it's pretty impactful. People seem to appreciate it, and it allows us to avoid what can really quickly become rabbit holes of
Hmm.
why is this in here.
Huh.
A company that often comes up is like Amazon. Why is Amazon in here? It's
Uh-huh.
like Amazon's core business can exist in a world where we solve climate change.
Mm.
Online retail and server
Mhm.
farms, that can totally exist. So it's upon us, even though we might not like it,
Uh-huh.
to hold and pressure them. We also have options where we call it our climate only portfolios, where you can just hold climate solutions companies and green bonds. They're
Ah.
higher risk and higher reward,
Uh-huh.
but we say, all right, if you don't want, the kind of the rest,
Right.
you can just hold these.
Yeah. And since you mentioned Amazon, I mean, obviously one of Amazon's biggest impacts is in the transportation of delivering all this stuff to us in the distributed networks. And interestingly enough, they have an order, which hopefully this is going to start getting fulfilled for 100,000 Rivian electric vans. So keep an eye on those Amazon trucks coming your way, because hopefully soon they'll be zero carbon and just delivering those packages without any carbon footprint, which would be awesome. Or at least not that piece of the carbon footprint anyway. All right. So how far far back in the value stream do you guys look when you're looking at companies? I mean, it's like, like let's take Amazon. It's not just the transportation that they're delivering, it's where they're getting their products from and their suppliers and who's doing what for which products. Do you guys go that far back or?
Yeah, so it's like it's one of the best questions that you can have here. Often in the carbon world, it's like, scope one, scope two, scope three. How are you paying attention to this? We, by looking at the entire stock market, actually get to see the supply chain with it. And so it is much more impactful, we believe, rather than saying to Amazon, hey, let's make sure you change how some retailer on your platform is sourcing its materials. Let's just go and work with the retailer directly and hold them and do that.
Hmm.
So that's why that's where that breadth comes from. If we actually want that strategy to be as broad as possible, because it allows us to engage the companies directly on just changing their own impacts.
Hmm.
Um, and again, it's great as much pressure as a company with a footprint of Amazon can pass down the line with
Hmm.
that. Climate change is a yes and. It's not a no, but we need pressure on all sides here. But
Yeah.
that's part of our strategy with it. Of we get to look down the rabbit hole and then go engage that company rather than tell Amazon to engage that company.
Okay. Cool. What about agriculture? I mean, agriculture, we all got to eat, right? So, and climate is having a big impact on agriculture, but also agriculture uses a tremendous amount of, right now, fertilizers and other anti-climate things. Plus, they have all the equipment that does that, and then the transportation that does that, yada, 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 yada. And then there's the ability for organic and other types of sustainable farming that actually take carbon out of the atmosphere. So, how do you guys look at agriculture?
That's such a great question. It's one of the most complicated spaces, frankly. I'll add just a little bit of a wrinkle in that, at least to the most recent meta studies we've seen, switching to regenerative agriculture, while it is generally better for the environment around you, it is actually unclear if it has a net positive on emissions. Yeah, it's really like I hope it's wrong, these studies, but it ends up in a release of more nitrous oxide, which is like a much more potent greenhouse gas
Hmm.
in it. Yeah, I can send it to you for the show notes.
Yeah, that'd be
So
great.
I,
Please.
I, and I say that to highlight that it is complicated
Right.
in the agriculture space.
Hmm.
We again can apply that very basic lens of saying, yes, this is theoretically an industry that can be aligned with solving climate change. And
Hmm.
there's many people innovating. Regenerative is largely better. It can be more profitable. Yes, it's more work.
Hmm.
Also, things like managed grazing is much better for the soils and local ecosystems.
Hmm.
It can capture
Hmm.
more water.
Hmm.
It can make those ranchers more money in the end. So there is a broad transition, and again, that's where for us as owners of these companies, um, it's upon us to engage them.
Yeah.
And work with them. The place that we don't is we don't hold any uh, of the big meat producers.
Mm.
Um, that is one place that we drew the line because of specifically beef's very significant climate contributions.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, it is something that we may revisit in the future of, is this a place that we want to engage there? But that is one of the places that we did end up drawing that line. Part of what's challenging, and I'd say this very explicitly, is like the world is complicated and the world is hyper capitalistic and it is hyper extractive
Mm.
and that we live in. And so part of the balance of a carbon collective is how are we holding that future of what we need to build, but then using that to as pragmatically engage with the present
Hmm.
as possible. And that's always going to be a work in progress.
Mm.
And we want to use the best science that we can with it and the best strategies that we can as possible. So
Uh,
I, I hope that's like somewhat of a satisfying answer when it
yeah.
comes to agriculture.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd like to ask you for, we ask folks if there's one big kind of unique value, we call them supernova, a concept or idea, that something that you've done that really has a major impact and that you think people should know about. One of the biggest things, what can people do?
One, yeah. So I'll answer in two parts.
Hmm.
Um, the first thing is we like to talk about a framework of we so often when it comes to climate change as individuals say we get stuck at the top of the loop of just like I'm terrified emotionally and I don't know what to do. And I like see these lists and it's like everything. You have to do everything. Or like, how should I prioritize within that?
Mm-hmm.
What we found to be a really helpful framework is focus on the big things, like the gears of your life that run in the background, where it's a weighty decision to make
Mm-hmm.
a change in it. But
Mm-hmm.
once you make it, you're done and you just get to go on living your life. So this is where you keep your money in your bank. Is it financing fossil fuels? Is it financing renewable energy? A big decision, a lot of like accounts to switch and stuff like that. But once you do it, you're just banking again. You don't
Mm-hmm.
need to like think about like, should I be pescatarian today? Where you invest, obviously that's what we do. How do you power your home? How do you transport
Mm-hmm.
yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Once you buy an electric car, then you just drive. You're not like, what climate action am I taking today? So that is often what we say as a framework that, again, if you live in an apartment and in a city, you might have different ways that you can engage with that.
Right.
Um, but we think that's always a really good place to start. And then beyond that, that's where you then get to go, okay, what am I really into? What am I like? What do I get excited about within
Mm.
this? Maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
food and
Mm-hmm.
diet
Mm-hmm.
and things like that, or maybe it's something else.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe sustainable fashion,
Mm-hmm.
um, whatever that is. That's a framework that we found to be really helpful. Of remove the really big rocks first, and then you can kind of take a breath and reestablish.
Cool. So in most entrepreneurs' journey, there's kind of this moment where they were hitting their head against the wall or just trying to solve some problem, and all of a sudden there was this big aha moment where the answer became clear. Well, do you have a particular moment in your career that you'd like to share that was like that?
Yeah, I'll share like from fairly early on. We ended up doing 120 interviews with folks to try and understand where their climate anxiety took them and where they got blocked. This was
Mm.
before we knew that Carbon Collective was going to be an investing company.
Mm-hmm.
And we set up like all these elaborate demos and stuff like that to try to walk people through like a simulation of what it could be. And our first interview, we spent like, tens of hours on this. Our first interview, this guy says, "Hey, this was fine, but you really should read this book called The Mom Test." We're like,
Mm.
"What's the mom test?" And it is the best book I've ever read for people who are looking to see, should this product exist?
Ha.
Because what it does is it teaches you how to an interview style where you go and you just dig for past behaviors and you dig for the why of them and where people got blocked. And it's called the mom test because you could literally interview your own mother and get a pretty good high confidence of whether she would use the product or not
Uh-huh.
without her saying like, "Oh honey, I'm sure that's that it's going to be great." So that was a really big aha and kind of approach of how are we, we had so many ideas and what it could be, but how are we really making sure we're listening
Yeah.
here and putting that ego aside and just going in this process of curiosity and
Cool.
discovery.
Awesome. So, on the other side of most entrepreneurs' journey, there's a particular moment where everything was looking really bleak and dark and horrible, and it was like, "What am I doing? This is unbelievably bad, and I can't keep going in this direction." And then there's some sort of lesson learned. So, could you care to share one of
Yeah.
yours, please?
Yeah. So many. I think this is my co-founder and I's second company starting together. And in
Mm-hmm.
our first company, it was a very hard technological problem that we were working on, and it was a real struggle. It's on with what did us in. We couldn't get it to work despite having great team and great investors.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to take ourselves back to school within that of how do we actually be effective managers for a team. And we ended up
Mm-hmm.
reading, I think, like 15 books together.
Mm-hmm.
We love audiobooks, so we just listened to them at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that type of investment of your team is everything.
Mm-hmm.
Teamwork is, if you don't have effective teamwork, then you aren't going to be successful, or it's
Mm-hmm.
very hard to be successful.
Sure.
So the investment in that team and really what it means to put that front and center. Um, I think that's been really impactful for us, and it's been really cool now, like a few years later, like we doubled the size of our team, and one of the required readings, it's actually a book called Nonviolent Communication. And amazing book. It's great for personal life, great for work. Um, and it was really cool to hear one of our new employees said like, "Oh, when I started reading this, I then saw like, multiple ways that my co-founder James and I were using this." I was like, that's like 3 years of work of trying to be that this is to that degree a part of our culture that someone would just observe that and not be prompted in any way. So that was a huge, just like pretty fairly recent win for me
Outstanding.
as a leader of this
Cool.
company.
Excellent. Outstanding. All right, we're going to enter in the few minutes left the pulsar round. We're going to ask you a series of questions, and we're looking for your short, succinct, amazing, and mind blowing answers. Are you ready, Zach?
Hit me.
All right. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Oh God, this is not quick at all. Learn.
Hey,
Just
that's
keep
great.
learning. So
Just
long
keep
as you're
learning.
learning, you're on the right path.
Excellent. Share one of your personal habits that contributes to your success.
Um, Making sure I get good sleep, which has been really hard with a 5-month-old, but really
Oh man,
prioritizing that.
my two biological kids didn't sleep till they were 3, man.
Oh God,
Yeah, I
I
was
am so
dragging.
sorry.
I was dragging, boy. But luckily they're up and older and they're out and they have, well, at least one of them's got their own kids now, which is great. The other one's got my grand.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's great. The other one's got my grand doggy. So
That's amazing.
she's traveling cross country in her RV with my grand doggy and a boyfriend. It's great. So anyway, all right, let's back to you. Back to you. All right, an internet resource that you'd care to share that you think people should listen to, look at.
Um, I love Loom. If you've not used it, it is a way of recording your screen and yourself. It is the best remote work tool I've ever used. It saves you needing to write paragraphs of, feedback or something like that. You can just record yourself over the screen being like, why is this here? Let's move this. I'm having this type of problem. LOOM. I probably film like 5 to 10 a day.
Wow, Loom. All right, thank you very much. So you already recommended a book, and again, that book was
The Mom Test.
The Mom Test. Excellent. And if you had a magic wand and you could wave it and change one thing for everybody in the world, what would it be?
I think I would reestablish our deep human connection to nature and that we're a part of it. I think that if that happened across the world, so many of our environmental problems, and in addition to climate change, we would just feel so much of the pain that is happening.
Yeah.
Um, that we wouldn't need to do anything to solve
Mm,
it. It would just happen.
yeah. Well, we also have this little section we call WTF or F. Weather time fudge, an extreme weather event that you lived through, tell the tale. Or weather time fun, the most fun you ever had, and the type of weather it was. Would you care to share an example for you of a personal event that happened?
Um, I lived through the Orange Day in San Francisco in the Bay Area. Um, this was during fire season. I, at the time, was waking up with the sun. There's a skylight right above my bed, and it was so. I woke up at 10 a.m.
Wow.
I normally was waking up at 7 with it because of that. It was the eeriest, weirdest day I've ever been in. My wife, we had recently bought a home in the Bay Area, and we looked at each other and we're like, did we make a huge mistake?
Yeah. Wow. Crazy. Wow. Well, so glad
Yeah,
you
so
guys survived.
WTF.
WTF. Absolutely, man. All right. What's one thing you're most energized about today, Zach?
Honestly, like I'm really energized about my kid.
Uh
He's just like he's in
huh.
such a cute phase.
So great.
Whenever I see him, he smiles at me. It's
Yeah.
just like it's incredible.
Yeah, 5 months olds are just awesome, man. So enjoy, enjoy. They grow up so fast, and then you'll be
Yeah,
saying, "Oh my gosh, I wish you were little again."
I know. I'm both feeling nostalgic for now and very eager for him to get older so he sleeps more, etc.
Yeah, yeah, always that balance. So, well, enjoy though, man. They grow really fast. So, excellent. All right, grand finale. If you would share a piece of guidance and the best way for people to get a hold of you.
Um, yeah, I think that piece of guidance goes back to that initial um, life axiom. I don't remember the exact word that you used, but so long as you're learning, you're on the right path. And just trust that that's going to take you there.
Hmm.
And if you want to get a hold of us, check us out at carboncollective.co. We're real people who care about climate change a lot. So if you have any questions or like, investing is scary, but what should I do? Or I have this account and I don't know what to do with, we literally have a button on our website called Talk to a Human, and you could book a time to talk with us. Again, we're real people. We're not going to sell you anything hard. We're here to be helpful.
Outstanding. Anything we missed that you wanted to cover?
I don't think so, Ron. Just super glad to be here.
Yeah, it's really great to have you. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Zach Stein of the Carbon Collective.co. And hey, thank you very much for sharing your time, your wisdom, and your expertise, and your outstanding commitment to a brighter future.
Ron, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me and for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Zach.